NCAA champion and Olympian Cam Levins can now add Canadian marathon record holder to that already impressive resume. Cam, in his debut marathon, ran a 2:09:25 marathon at this year's Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon a few weeks ago. We started our chat with the Hoka One One runner by talking about what he was going through in the minutes after the elation of crossing the finish line. So I think to start, we should paint a little bit of a picture. It was a very cold morning in Toronto. From where I was in the photography pit, your face pops up on this giant screen, and you're about 200 meters out. There was a little bit of silence at first, which kind of confused me. But as soon as people realized just what was happening, really the crowds erupted. And you came around the corner, you crossed that line, and I just there's those pictures that have been popping up all around the web. They're on the front of newspapers and that sort of stuff. Just this look of pure triumph and pure elation. What the cameras didn't really catch was what happened in the minutes after, where I don't know. I think your facial expression changed a little bit, and I know in the media pit you were talking about it just being very, very overwhelming. Given that there's been almost 2 weeks now since that moment, can you really describe what was going on in your head? In those minutes after the marathon finished.
Yeah, I think. Sorry. First of all, thank you for having me on the show, on your podcast. Very interesting questions but I just wanted to thank you for being on the show.
Oh, pleasure's all mine, man.
Yeah. I think a lot of what was going through my mind at that point is kind of just accepting what happened. There had just been my family and my wife and I talked a lot about this, and had been a lot of time training and getting ready, and it just felt like everything had come together at the right time before this race, and I was prepared for things to go well, and it just happened. It was kind of this acceptance, like, wow, it actually all came together at the right time. I wanted to do well in Canada in this marathon, take on the Canadian record, and it just felt like the culmination of so many things that happened beforehand. And it was overwhelming and emotional, having my entire family there, and it just felt like it'd been a really long time coming and a lot of work leading up to it, and it was just thrilling.
I mean, there's a ton to break down there. I want to start with the family who you mentioned, and that was just so cool. I can only think that this would happen, at a CRS race or at a race in Canada, but they're beside me, in their own little sectioned off area, right beside the finish line was, your wife, your mom, your dad. I'm told your coach was pretty nearby there as well, but they were right beside in a very restricted area as well too. Was that all planned? Did you know about that? And man, that had to be something special when you crossed the line.
I guess they kind of broke into the restricted area to get where they were, funny enough. So I'm certain that was not planned, because I think they got in a little bit of trouble for it. But it was great having them there. I mean, I hardly knew what was going on after the race. I just knew that they were there, and I was glad that they got to be some of the first people that I saw and celebrate with. And I think the race wanted to have my family nearby if I ended up breaking the record, so that could happen, and the media could experience us celebrating together as well. But I'm so thankful that I got to share that moment with them, because they went through all the moments beforehand. They went through all the hard stuff, so I'm glad they can enjoy the fun part too.
Yeah, I mean, it's been it's been I'm gonna say it's been a rough couple of years for you, since
Yeah.
since that national championships. I don't know if you follow along with what's on the boards. I really hope not, because there hasn't been a lot of positivity there. It's just been people calling the demise of your career for years. I think the phrases reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
I mean, like I gotta wonder about that, because there was so many people who had no belief in you coming back, and at a certain point you have to wonder how you yourself were able to scrounge that together, because let me tell you, the marathon is not an easy mental race. How are you able to put it together like that?
Um, over the last couple of years here, it felt like after surgery, it felt like starting at zero. I don't know how else to put it. My first bit of running, um, back from it was 5 minutes, like a couple times a week, and that was difficult. It was difficult for me to run that amount. And my first workout was, I've said this a few times before, but it was attempting to do a 1.5 mile tempo, and falling off the pace, and not very like a very very difficult pace. This especially before surgery, but even something that I didn't think would be astronomically difficult afterwards. I still couldn't handle that, and so it was a long climb back out of that. And every few months I'd often get to this point where it felt hopeless, and my wife or my family would have to kind of pull me out of it. And I say, or my family, especially my wife, because she was there always, and let me know that, hey, like, you're not where you want to be, but look where you were and look where you are now. You've moved forward, and you just have to be thankful for that. And I guess my point being is, it wasn't always me that was overcoming it. It was my family helping me overcome it. And getting into the actual marathon race, that's the easy part for me. I've always been a competitive guy and competitive racer, and I like to think that if I am prepared to, I can step up to the plate and take whatever pressure or whatever is there. And for most of that race, it was easy for me to stay focused in, and the marathon itself is easy enough to split up by basically bottle stations, is how I do it. It really divides up the race well, and I really just had to zone out for most of it, then buckle down the last 10 or 12 kilometers. And by that point, it's a race that I've done a million times before.
That leads to another question, maybe a little more short term, is like in the big workouts leading up, there it can often be a lot of doubt, especially going into that debut marathon. Was there a point in your training where you finished a workout, just knocked it out of the park, and you said, yeah, no, I think I can do this, and I think I can do it at this pace?
I did a marathon workout. Marathon workout. All of them are marathon workouts. I did a long run back in Portland a little bit before my Philadelphia half marathon, in the middle of September, and I ran it at like 5:20 pace for 24 miles, and I finished the last 4 hard. And I still would go on to do better workouts after that, but that was my first step of that really wasn't that difficult. I'm actually getting closer to the pace I potentially want to take on. I'm going to be able to do this. I think the 5:20 in itself is maybe close to 2:20 or 2:19-ish, something in that for the marathon. And so it was like, well, if I can do that in practice, surely I can handle a better pace in the race. And it's not like I just, completely went into the well to do that sort of workout. It's just it just felt natural. By that point, I was like, yeah, I've got another 6 weeks. I'm going to be I'm going to be good to go.
Now I'm going to jump in here quickly. In the preparation for Cam's marathon, he reached out to Reed Coolsett, the Canadian marathon phenom, as well as Ryan Vail, a 2:10:55 marathoner in Portland. Now, I mistakenly had heard that he had reached out to Ryan Hall. This wasn't the case, but Cam expanded on what he had heard.
Ryan has been great the last couple of years here, just for general training advice and just seeing what he's done in his builds. But particularly what I've reached out to both of them about has been more related to the actual taper the last couple of weeks, making sure I was not doing too much, too little. I just was really kind of nervous and felt particularly inexperienced with that. And I just wanted to get sort of as many viewpoints as I could to make sure, like, at that point, I felt I was really fit, and I just wanted to make sure I got to the starting line as prepared as I could be, and did everything right. And Reed was really interesting in that beyond that question, I feel like he answered so many other questions through other interviews that he did. Like, it felt like every interview someone asked him, oh, like, if you could give advice to Cam, or like, what do you think about him debuting? And I'm like, I'm sorry that my topic is hijacking all your interviews, first of all, but thank you for all this advice from afar. It's actually really useful. Often would say different things, and I'm like, I've gotten like a whole bunch of good info from just not even actually directly asking you, just other people asking in my stead, essentially. But yeah, no, both guys are great on top of a lot of other people, but those are my big sources of information close to the race, especially.
Speaking of marathoners that you were chatting with, I heard you mention on Rob Watson's show that Jerome Drayton actually gave you a call, which is, for historians of the sport, for people who have followed along with him, that's really something. He seems to be like a real introvert and someone who's really hard to get a hold of. What did he have to say?
Yeah, he's a really fascinating guy, and it was a huge honor for him to call and want to chat with me. I'm fairly certain he still follows the sport decently. He seemed to know a good amount of training, like the type of training that I did, because his main conversation is like, hey, this is what else I think you should try and do with your training. It's like, this is kind of what I did. So he's just giving me advice, which is awesome. Like, and it's incredibly fascinating to know the sort of stuff that he did. But yeah, but on top of just, congratulations, but that was what most of our conversation was, which I appreciate. He was kind of just like down to business with that. And it was awesome. It was really, really cool. And he seems like a very, very neat person, that's for sure.
A lot of the narrative, post your marathon was referencing the kind of, it's almost become a bit of running folklore, the huge mileage that you were putting in college. And, people were drawing that line between, he was running close to 200 miles a week. So therefore, obviously he'd be really good at the marathon. I don't know, the way I saw it though, is that, you were running that mileage, not to run that mileage, but to, chase an end of running faster, of being faster on the track and that sort of stuff. So that's why when I see, the 2:09:25, I'm thinking that that's not quite the end for you. That's not the end game here for you. What are you hoping to achieve in the marathon before you, eventually hang up the shoes?
Yeah, I think I like to hope that my debut is not what my PR ends up being for my entire career. And I definitely felt good entering this race, to where if I had entered basically any other competition that wasn't a marathon, I probably would have just went out with the leaders and tried to win the race. Like, I felt really, really fit in that regards. But with a marathon, there's a lot of unknown, and I really felt like I wanted to get in my first one to where I didn't have any like questions of what it would be like after that. And I've been asked before, it's like, what do I want to get out of this first marathon? or out of now, obviously it's done now, but what I wanted to get out of it. And my big thing that I always said was I wanted to walk away with the desire to do more afterwards with that great experience. And I think with, going out conservatively, running my own race, getting a feel for the race, and ultimately enjoying it is that desire. I've had a good one, and it makes me want to do more, immediately. And I think going out really aggressively and, perhaps not even finishing, if that happened, can really put a damper on that and really potentially almost stay with you in like a state of like mental scarring. It's like suddenly you have a fear associated with the event instead of a joy associated with it. And so, yeah, that being said, I know the question was more, how fast do I think I can go? I mean, ultimately, I don't know. I think the next one I want to have that opportunity to just go out and race it, see how I can challenge up front in whatever it is. And ultimately sort of see where that puts me next. I think no matter what, I just want to, like I wanted to be on the track, competitive at the event with the best in the world. And while 2:09 is a great time, it's not to that point yet. We know what the world record is. Yeah. And it's well away from that still. And I mean, if I want to be competitive at an international level outside of that, I mean, I have to be more like 2:04, 2:05. So I mean, I think ultimately I need to get down into that range, and when you get down to that range, I don't know where the limits become if you're able to do something like that.
So you talked about doing, a spring marathon. I'm kind of wondering, after that answer, are you thinking more of like something like a Rotterdam or a London, where you would just go, you have that opportunity to go super, super fast, or would you be looking more to be there for the race at a place like Boston, for example?
I think I need to get experience in both cases at some point, and I don't know which one's going to come next. But I think in either the spring or fall, both those kind of choices exist. If that makes sense. I mean, there's going to be fast ones, or ones akin to a Boston where it's more championship style, I would call it. And so, I mean, I don't really know which one I'm going to do next or which is sort of the better choice at this point. But yeah, I mean, I need to get both sides of that in my experience in the marathon.
Speaking of courses, it was a year before you ran the marathon this year. You were supposed to run the half marathon, but I believe I bumped into you just before that, and you said you were going to hop into the lead truck and go and see the course. Now that's something that is fairly common, in the elite marathoning world, to preview a course before you run it. What are your thoughts on the Toronto course? I think it's a pretty speedy course, but what were your opinions?
Yeah, I think my thoughts on it, especially before running it, were that it's an especially fast course, and there's some pretty good times run it over the years. I think really the only thing that plays against it that surprised me a little bit is the last 10K of the course. With generally, I guess, the way the wind goes across the city, you usually face the wind entering that last 10K. And for the most part, that's sort of a good thing across this course because much of it goes with the wind or through the middle of the race. But when you're in the most difficult, most tired section of the race, you're going back against the wind and kind of hitting the most climbs there are, or some of the most climbs you have in the course, at least felt that way. And so I think that can be a really rough thing when you're exhausted. For me, I think I was feeling good enough and had sort of the what's the word I'm looking for here? Well, I had good motivation on the course from people around me, and I had momentum with me to where I could cover it well. But a person like, we went past John Career during that section. He was in a really difficult time. Ultimately caught Jake at the end of the race, and it's like trying to handle that section can be really rough when you're tired. And I think it also was also just a lot colder on that section of the course too, which I think ultimately led to Jake's problems as well. So it's not exactly what I thought it would be, but I wouldn't call it a slow course by any means. Just more difficult than I sort of anticipated.
For people who maybe aren't super familiar with the course, there's a couple almost like 360-degree sort of turnarounds where you can really gauge where your competition is, really get a good shot because you're running, I don't know, I guess against them for kilometers at a time. Did you kind of use that as motivation? Like, how did you play those sorts of things? Did you use them strategically?
I mean, honestly, I truly felt like I just stayed out of the actual like competitive side of the race. I mean, besides, I just felt like I was competing against myself and a clock mostly. I didn't know what place I was in as I as I came into the finish. I had no clue. I mean, about the only time that I actually started chasing after another athlete is about 3K left, and someone told me that I was gaining on Jake Robertson, and but up to that point, I was just running based on how I felt. Trying to get the best time that I could, and just started running my own race regardless of what was going around. And I mean, that's why when I talk of races to come, I'd like to, experience ones not like that, where I just have to compete and react to the race and learn how to do that, or at very least gain experience doing it. Maybe I already have an affinity for it. I don't know, but yeah, I think the marathon's an interesting event in that regard, and interesting in that you don't necessarily always know where other athletes are. If you are a ways back, you may stand a chance of catching someone, miles later in the course, and just not even see them.
There was for anyone who was watching the feed, or who were on the course that day, they would see that you had someone to run with for some pretty critical parts of that run. I believe his name was Daniel Mesfun.
Yeah.
Perhaps correct me. I believe you guys are best buddies now.
Yeah.
Did you get to chat with him after the race? Just because I just feel like you guys are probably pretty linked, after that, like after going through that entire race and being in close proximity. He got a really great time out of it too.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I'm super, super thankful for that guy. And I mean, I really just knew him as Daniel by the end of the race. But yeah, early in the race, he was bugging me a little bit. I felt like he was sort of cutting me off of these pacers. And I didn't actually know initially that he was doing the full marathon. So I'm like, is this one of the half guys, like getting him getting in the way on these pacers? What's going on? And then as we came up with the half point and he started, he was fueling. I was like, oh, okay, now I think this guy's in it for the full thing. But I didn't realize anyone else was going to be coming out with this pace group. And so just as the race went along, he just continued to hang in there and looked great. And then he started taking off at 30K, and he sort of got us going on the switching back and forth, kind of motioned for me to take the lead, and I did. And then he would take it back after I was holding it for a while, and it was just back and forth. And I mean, I'm certain I couldn't have done as well as I did without him. I'm just thankful he got a good time out of it as well. And yeah, it is interesting how I'm starting to think of road races, and I guess marathons specifically, that there's a certain appreciation for having gone through the prep that it takes to be ready to run a good marathon, where there kind of is that link that it's like, everyone's it's easy to sort of like work together to try and do well, where it may not happen as much in shorter events. And it's a really cool attitude, I think, among a lot of these athletes, that you don't see as much on the track.
Well, I really don't think that we could ask for a much better ambassador for the sport, based on what we've seen over the past 2 weeks, but, over your entire career. I mean, at this point, you're an Olympian, you're an NCAA champion. You are now a Canadian record holder. I do have to ask you one more question, though, because there was a tweet that popped up today. Will you be the 2018 Canadian cross country champion?
Oh man, I've thought about this a lot over the whole year here. I mean, I think I really would like to get back into cross country at some point here. And before making this build towards this marathon, even before the marathon, I thought maybe I'd be able to bounce back from it quick enough to come back and run cross. But there's no way. There's just no possible way I'm going to be ready to run the championship. I mean, I haven't even started running since the marathon. I'm planning to start back up here in a couple of days, but there's no way. I would love to somehow make my way to a World XC or whatever, but I'm not going to be running the Canadian Championships unless there's some, change in qualifying. I don't know. It's not happening this year, unfortunately, which is a shame. I like cross. I'd love to compete against athletes over that sort of terrain and competition type again, but I don't know when that's going to happen again. We'll see.
Well, I guess we'll put you down as a maybe then.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I really had this sort of appreciation for seeing a guy like Reed Coolsat bounce back from marathons and running XC in the years that he has, and it's definitely helped me understand just how difficult it is to do that. And I know he's sort of made the choice yes or no based on the years, but I think he has in the past made it like decently ready for the Canadian cross country championships after a marathon, like even close to when this one was run, and still been ready. And it's just very, very impressive. But it's not happening for me this year.
Before we end this off, I do want to do one more thing. If you just want to give a quick shout out to your sponsor, because I mean they're a big part of this story as well too. They really rolled the dice, and they came up pretty big. But maybe talk about some of the shoes you've enjoyed to wear and that sort of stuff as well too from Hoka.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, that's very true. They picked me up in a point in my career that, you're right. It truly could have went either way. I could have just been a waste of their money, basically. What if I truly found out I wouldn't be able to compete at an elite level again after surgery, and I'd be locked in. They'd be locked into a contract with me here, and I'm just so thankful that they decided to take me on and able to support me and take that stress off me to be able to train full time and get rolling again. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've even said the name of them yet. They're Hoka One One, and it's a running specialty company, shoe sponsor, and their shoes are fantastic. They've been just a fantastic choice post surgery for me as well on my foot. My legs have not felt really ever as good as stepping into these shoes and putting in the kind of mileage that I do, and not having my legs feel so beat up from it. And I originally was running in something called the Hoka, the Clifton, and it's a great shoe, and I was thrilled with it for a starter. One that I've switched over to their newer shoe this year called the Kavu, Cabu, and they're fantastic. I think I like them in that they're sort of a good mix from what I originally used, more in like a combination with the sort of technology and choices Hoka makes with their shoes. And it's just a really good balance for what I like. I think it's sort of flatter through the full shoe, where a lot of Hoka shoes tend to have kind of a rolling motion to them. Which, I mean, I think like I didn't have any issues with when I was running in the Clifton, but for what I like to do, for the type of training I do, I think this has been a better choice. And yeah, it's felt great, and I've been healthy in them, which is, you know, I think I can speak to the last couple of years. It's a great thing to be able to run and be, relatively pain-free much of the time, and continue to stay so and move forward with fitness. And that's been awesome. And I've been racing in something called the Carbon Rocket. And it's a new shoe coming out in the spring of 2019. So I've been running in sort of their, prototype at this point. And I think it bears similarity to what some of the other marathon shoes are moving towards now. That's been sort of originally, I think, technology developed by Nike's 4% with the carbon plate through it. And I don't know, I had no issues with it in the marathon in Toronto. They felt good. I don't necessarily know how much I buy into the carbon plate being this like massive difference in shoes, but I ran great in them, so I have no complaints about it. And that no foot pain for 26 miles. That's great. And yeah, they've been good. And I should also speak to, more recently, I've partnered up with Polar Watches. And once again, I hadn't ran this marathon yet. They picked me up when I still hadn't done anything too particularly impressive. And so I'm glad they stuck their neck out for me as well. And I've enjoyed their watches so far, and still getting used to the new technology on it. But there's been a lot of different choices on it. I'm still trying to work through and figure out that I think that's probably a good thing. They have a lot of options on them, so it's been good. It's been good all around.
Well, all I can say is that I'm glad that those guys all picked you up as well too. I'm glad that we got to witness this moment this year, and man, it was just such an incredible feeling to watch you come across that line. And I'm sure I speak for everyone who listens to the show when I say congratulations and welcome back, Cam. Thanks so much for being on the show and for being on everyone's show, man. You have been a warrior this past week, I got to tell you.
Well, thank you. I'm more than happy to spend this time. I spend most of my day training, and so I have all this time off, and might as well keep putting it to good use and chat to anybody and help anybody with any requests they have with anything, basically, at this point. So yeah, it's been fun, really. And all the different interviewers and podcasts have been great in that. In general, they're asking new questions, and so I don't have to repeat myself too much. That's nice. It's nice to be able to tell sort of a different story each time.